Okay, it's started. So you'll also be able to access the recording or pass it along to a colleague. We'll send you information about that afterwards. So let's begin. Today's webinar, Adult Education Career Pathways, Flexible Models for Challenging Times. I'm very pleased to have with us today two excellent presenters. First is Hope Kottner. And as you can see, she's the VP for Community College Initiatives at CORD. CORD is the Center for Occupational Research and Development. You know, at CORD, she manages faculty development projects such as the North Carolina Network for Excellence in Teaching, as well as AT&T's Professional Development Academy for community college faculty. A bunch of things going on at CORD that Hope manages. She's been, amongst a number of things, she's been the past chairperson of the Women's Resource Center Advisory Council at the Texas State Technical College System. She's also a member of the American Association of Community Colleges and other places as well. Also joining us today is Bob LePage. Bob has been appointed to serve as the Vice President of the Foundation and Workforce Training at Springfield Technical Community College in Massachusetts. You know, in his role there, he serves as Executive Director of Training and Workforce Options and Regional Collaboratives between Springfield and Holyoke Community College. He also has an interesting story. He's been involved recently in Massachusetts with their Gaming Commission and the Commonwealth's 15 community colleges. I think there's going to be a huge impact on the workforce there as their gaming initiatives start taking fruition in Massachusetts. That's another story, but Bob's got a lot of experience. He's a nationally known speaker. He's a frequent presenter at national conferences, and we're very pleased to have Bob and Hope online today. And there you can see my picture. There's Mike Lasecki. That's me. I'm the moderator. I'm the host. So let's begin. Hope, will you start? I'm going to advance to the first slide and turn it over to you. Go ahead.
Great. Thanks so much, Mike, and welcome everyone. We're excited you're a part of our conversation this afternoon or this morning, depending upon where you're joining us from. You see on this slide a big red word that I'm sure is central to many of your conversations at your institutions, in your states, and in your communities, and it's something that obviously our nation has been very concerned about, acutely concerned about for a number of years. This conversation around jobs, the ability for America to innovate, to support economic development and growth, our concerns about global competitiveness, but obviously the key factor that we have been concerned about most recently is our ability to address the skill level required for those jobs. And where those job openings are, there certainly exists, as we know, a skills gap between the available workforce and the jobs that exist. By 2018, according to this report from Georgetown Center on Education and the Workforce, about 2/3 of all employment are going to require some college education or better. And we know from experience that this is already the case. Certainly this statistic and others like it have spurred the completion agenda conversations across the country. The bottom line is that we're not completing as a nation. And another interesting factor is that 66% of the workforce of 2025 are adults who are already in the workforce. Many of them are not prepared for the middle skill jobs that are available and that certainly are going to be ever increasing. So we know obviously there's a disconnect here between jobs that are available and the skill level of the individuals who are already in the workforce and available to fill or not available because of their skill level. So career pathways, the topic of our conversation today, offers one solution that we think can be really effective for states and for communities to address this need. We offer a definition to you here that's one from the Career Pathways How-To Guide from Workforce Strategy Center, and the main elements of it have been pretty much adopted by a number of federal agencies so that we can all at least be talking about the same thing. Certainly the definition may be adapted at the state and local level. It may be adapted as well for the populations that we're serving, and we'll talk about that specifically today. But there are some key elements here that I want to point out. Career Pathways is truly a series of connected education and training strategies that enable individuals to secure employment within a specific occupational sector, and we'll talk about how you identify which sectors are growth areas in your community or region, and that career pathways allow individuals to advance over time to successively higher levels of education and employment within that sector, and that each step, here's a critical piece, each step on that pathway is designed to prepare the participant for the next step, and whether that next step is education or employment. So why are we talking about a career pathway system? What's happening out there? We know that jobs are certainly an issue, that there's a skills mismatch, but why is a career pathway system something that we're looking at? Well, depending upon what level of education or organizations you represent, many of these things are obviously concerns that you'll have on a daily basis. High school dropout rates, we know, across the nation are too high, and in many instances, because students are disconnected. They don't see the relevance of their education to their future careers. And they're not connecting in the classroom, and so they're not succeeding. We also see that the rates of college transition and completion are much too low, and that those who are going, in many instances, even though they have a secondary credential, they arrive at the college front door, they already need remediation in one or more areas. But we also know that completion agenda is so important to credential and a degree attainment that's critical to our economic growth. And we know that we're not doing a good job of addressing it yet because there's this mismatch between what employers say they need in terms of skill level and the workforce that we currently have now to fill those gaps. So we look now at a Career Pathways partnership, and what will that take in a community? Who will need to be at the table to build a Career Pathways partnership that supports the Career Pathways system and the programs that comprise it? Educators are an obvious answer. Employers, they must also be an obvious answer. And community leaders. It truly does take a community and the engagement of all of these stakeholders to build a partnership that will be effective. And when we talk about a Career Pathway system, we're looking at a number of elements. This graphic really shows several things that I want to call your attention to. And that is that ultimately we're talking about content levels here. You may see secondary education, post-secondary, and adult education there in between. And we're really not talking so much, and we don't want to get caught up today, about the age of our learners. We're talking about the completion of content and how that content has to be successive and connected and related. So we need to be supporting a culture that supports transitions from one level to the next, from secondary education to post-secondary, and if that requires support through adult education programs, because we have adults who are the re-entry pipeline, if you will, who haven't completed the secondary credential and they need that before they can move on to post-secondary education. That may consist of certificates, technical diplomas, associate degrees, and an opportunity for employment, concluding those steps, but then also the opportunity to continue on. So it's a continuum here, offering multiple entry and exit points, but it also requires a community to work together to see this and communicate with one another about this continuum, and to work together to eliminate barriers to completion from one stage to the next. To communicate that it's going to take systemic change to do that in many cases. That support in our communities, we have to have a mindset, build a culture of learner success so that ultimately that completion agenda can be realized by all adults. So when we look at a career pathway system, what are the essential ingredients? We'll talk about the elements behind some of these more than others today, but overall, here are some main ingredients we should be considering and building. Certainly an understanding of where everyone's coming from, building mutual trust and respect among all of our stakeholders is critical to building strong community partnerships that will allow us to move forward in system building. We want to focus on growth sectors, whether that's a cluster, we use the term sector, whether we use the term pathway, at varying levels, each term will apply differently. But the critical thing is, what are the employment needs? What are the industry growth opportunities in the region? And how do we identify those and develop programs to meet those needs? And then coordinating that curriculum, the articulation from the secondary content to the post-secondary content, regardless of the age of our learners, making sure that's coordinated, that it's integrated, and that we know where we're headed. And to do that, we've got employers engaged in program development all along the way. We're employing contextual teaching strategies so students can relate academic concepts to workplace context and really see the applicability of course content to their future careers and stay engaged and stay motivated, but also making sure that career exploration, career development, coaching, advising, guidance, all of those elements are made available to students, to learners, all throughout the continuum, and that we don't forget a student's interests and abilities and skill areas that they bring to the table when they come to our educational program. All right, the first bullet there, obviously, understanding benefits among our stakeholders, is something that we want to spend a little bit more time talking about as we move into our conversation about working with employers. Career Pathways partners, obviously, each group of stakeholders brings expectations to the table. And employers are certainly, they're looking at their own return on investment, which may be quantified by these elements here. They're concerned about having access to qualified workers that will help them ultimately increase their productivity, allowing them to reduce recruitment cost, turnover rate, to shorten that time for new employees to really hit the ground running, and obviously to have a pool of loyal and skilled employees and that they can promote through those career ladders that they will have worked with you to develop. Community leaders are obviously concerned about economic development and workforce development, and the convergence of those two, the ability to not only retain the employers they have, but attract new employers because of the skilled workforce available, ultimately allowing the income levels in the community to increase, and things like poverty and crime rates and support costs to be reduced. So those elements, both from the community vantage point and the employer vantage point, very important. And then policymakers obviously concerned about, if we put public dollars towards these programs, we want to make sure that they're having the impact that they need in our communities and that they're ultimately improving the outcomes of our communities and ultimately society. So adult career pathways, the specific focus of our conversation today, narrows us in our conversation a little bit, and we focus on what's different about adult career pathways. And we're really looking at those adults who are not currently in the education system, but they've realized the fact that they don't have the skills that they need to be eligible for jobs that are available, and so they're returning to the education and training environment. So what will they need? Well, obviously, if they're career limited, they're going to need a variety of wraparound services. These are adults who may be working a number of part-time jobs. They're going to have transportation issues, child care issues. They may need some mentoring. They need support in a variety of ways through possibly career navigating or career coaching type of supports to know that they can be successful. We also need an adult career pathways program very significant employer engagement to work together with education providers to look at different types of program schedules that allow returning adults to still work or to take on new entry-level positions that may be part-time. And we also need those community-based organizations engaged to help provide some of those support services. Adult career pathways also is kind of really a twofold approach. We're looking at long-term solutions for post-secondary credential attainment and opportunities for post-secondary education as far as the eye can see, but also short-term objectives so that adults can see the light at the end of the tunnel, that there are those stackable credentials available to them, and that ultimately they can see the relationship, like through a career ladder or a career map that you might use to explain to them the opportunities available in your community. They can see the relationship of those steps, those short-term objectives, and that they really seem like attainable benchmarks to them. And that's the thing we have to think about when we're talking about adult career pathways, is a model that's truly flexible. There's some states who are doing some fabulous work in adult career pathways, but ultimately the test of a great state framework is its ability to be flexible at the local and regional level, because you'll have rural parts of the state, suburban and urban communities, all who have some unique needs that have a variety of employer mix in a community, and you've got to be able to twist and flex that system as needed to meet those local needs. Bob and I have had the opportunity to work with a number of communities across the country on their own implementation of adult career pathways systems and programs to support those systems. And this is kind of a graphical representation, if you will, of some of the activities we have led communities through in what we call our phase 1 of an adult career pathways program development. It's really 3 big components here, if you will: industry engagement phase, community engagement phase, and culminating activities. We start with the industry engagement phase, and the list can go on here in terms of the number of sectors, but this is an example where we're engaging the employers and identifying their needs. And Bob's going to talk very specifically about how we've done that, but that's where we crystallize what are the sectors of focus in our communities, where are those jobs, specifically which occupations, and what types of programs will it take to prepare the available adults for those jobs. And also, we engage community stakeholders, and we've done this through a variety of types of sessions, depending upon the communities and the size of the region, but it usually takes the format of a career pathways visioning session where we have senior community leaders, industry leaders, education leaders at the table, and they're all thinking about the possibilities for career pathways partnerships and what it might mean to their community and what barriers might exist that they're going to have to collaborate on to break down. Then we also have separate sessions where we just have the educators, but at varying levels, from K-12, adult education providers, community colleges, even university partners together, saying in our community, what are the educational institutions' roles, responsibilities, expectations, opportunities, challenges, and really looking at just the educational provider issues related to the program. And then obviously the community organizations who take on many different shapes and sizes based upon the community, but they can be so critical to ensuring the success of adult career pathways programs because of those wraparound support services that I mentioned earlier that are so critically important to the success of learners. And then we've got a series of culminating activities, and these may be different depending upon the community, but it usually involves some type of professional development, whether that's faculty development workshops for teachers who are going to be teaching using contextual teaching strategies, integrated education and training strategies in the classroom with these programs, whether that's on how to develop the career ladders that you'll use with your program participants to help them understand their opportunities and the successive steps that they'll take to progress, and then obviously an implementation plan for moving forward. And that implementation takes on a number of shapes and sizes depending upon the community, but this is where the formal collaboration and partnering really takes place, where we look at a multi-agency, multi-institution, and employer collaboration, get into the nuts and bolts of program development. In a community, we may have determined that you need a bridge program to a certificate program that's very specifically aligned to the needs of a particular industry sector, or you may determine that also based upon the skill level of the available adults who want to participate in the program that you need a pre-bridge, and all the steps along the way. And we'll look at some specific states who are doing things like that and how they're handling that. The faculty development component, we mentioned earlier, career guidance and planning and the importance of that, making sure we don't forget that. It's integrated both in the coursework as well as a separate piece through career development support. We've got those coordinated support services, and that we're looking as a community at those policies that need to be addressed so that we can remove barriers and champion learner success all along the way, making sure the community is aware of what's going on and advocates the type of re-engagement of adults into formal education and the importance of completing education and attaining credentials. And then never forgetting that we've got to evaluate how we're doing all along the way, and ultimately doing so that we can tweak our program development and all those other relationship building aspects and program implementation aspects so that we can sustain the program over time. There's a couple of different elements that we look at here in terms of implementation. There's some great resources out there for system building. Here's one example. And I should mention, if we didn't mention this earlier in the introductions, that all the slides will be available to you. So don't feel like you've got to scribble down these notes or copy the URL if you don't have it handy. But this is a wonderful system building tool that's available from the U.S. Department of Labor. It was completed by their Career Pathways Technical Assistance Initiative, which just wrapped up about a year ago. And they have a whole host of resources, including a toolkit. They organized their resources of that project around 6 key elements of Career Pathways, really looking at building systems in states and communities and the 6 major steps and support resources for each of those steps to do that. What Bob and I have spent a lot of time doing is helping communities not only look at system building, but people building. And this graphic here represents 7 components of what are commonly known as Adult Career Pathways learner needs. And they're not necessarily linear. We joke about this graphic looking like a pineapple or a transformer, but the key thing is to show that there are varying elements that an individual brings to the table. Obviously, they've got personal needs, and some individuals will need more support services than others. Employability skills are key. We may have some veterans returning to civilian life and trying to figure out how they translate the career and technical skills that they developed in the military, some of the employability and leadership skills that they bring to the table, but what other academic skills might they need to shore up to really pursue a program of interest? And the same can be said for other populations and the types of support they may need. A lot of adults, knowing that there may be some opportunities in certain career areas, they may have never thought of themselves in that type of an industry. And so helping them wrap their mind around their, how matching their interests and their skills to a new career focus is obviously can be a challenge as well. But critically important is making sure that all of our programs have this progression, that there's a series of a progression over time, these varying stages where an adult will be in formal education and then varying degrees of employment and education involvement over time, so that it's not necessarily 50-50 at any of these stages. It may be 30-70. It may change and increase in each component over time as the learner is moving towards advancement. And so there may be a career ladder, a career map, a whole host of tools to communicate these opportunities to an individual. But this is where it's so important for your employers to be so closely involved in your program development, because their ability to support individuals as they pursue this education and training and the attainment of these credentials that are so important to be successful in the workplace is critical. So we are looking at both career progress and education progress as being equal parts of the equation. So Mike, that concludes our conversation about the first portion of our presentation this afternoon, which is really setting the framework for the Adult Career Pathway system before we move into our conversation about employer partnerships to support those systems.
Thank you, Hope. I'd like to invite participants to submit any questions they have in the chat window. You can see how the arrow is pointing. Well, of course, your chat window is going to be on the far left of your screen, but please use that. Hope, we do have a couple of questions that came in. And the first one let me propose to you is about this sector. You mentioned sectors. What definition do you use? It's the Fed definition? Do you think of it locally? How do we think about sectors?
Well, both Bob and I have found in our work across the country that oftentimes it varies by state. Sometimes it varies by which stakeholder groups are at the table. At the federal level, you have BLS industry sectors, you have the Department of Education's 16 career clusters, and a whole host of other state-level combinations of terms and definitions that may apply. The key thing, and we try to be a little bit generic in our use of the term industry sector, the key thing is that communities, regions, states, whatever your entity is that you're looking at planning for, is that you're really identifying what industry opportunities exist, where is the growth, what specific occupations will be needed to support that growth, and then aligning your program development to those quote-unquote sectors.
Okay, that's a good There's another question that came in about how do you communicate with, in this case, the adults? I mean, how do you let them know that I think that's the essence of the question, that these career pathways actually exist? How do you market the programs once you've got them set up? That's probably a large question. Yeah.
Yeah, it is, and I think that might be something worth a follow-up as well. There's some great both state and local programs across the country. They're doing an excellent job of marketing and recruitment. Sometimes, then there's a program that I'll mention later in our program today, out of the community-based organization in Chicago that reached out to specific populations through the communities that they serve because of the need for Hispanic healthcare workers and the lack that they saw in their region. And so they specifically targeted that population through a whole host of community organizations that they work with to reach out to individuals who were bilingual and who had an interest in working in the healthcare field. Just one example. So there's a lot of programs that are using specific strategies, but I think the key thing is, working in partnership with your employers, your adult education providers, your community colleges who are already doing recruitment. You may have folks who had interest in a nursing program and that didn't quite have the skills to be accepted, but there may be some other opportunities in the healthcare arena that may be of interest to them. So I think it takes a lot of creative solutions, but the key thing is making sure that you have the tools to communicate with those adults once they do get there, and that you have made it easy for adults to approach your institution. There's a story that we write about in our Adult Career Pathways book about an individual who sits in their car for 2 weeks straight in the parking lot of the community college, afraid to go in the door and say, I'd like to enroll, or I'd like to know more about programs. And once they finally go in, the person says, oh, that's great. We're going to arrange a meeting with you, with a counselor who serves the students with your the first letter of your last name next Thursday, and you can come back. And so, the one-stop, making sure that when your students do arrive, that you can really capture their attention and communicate with a career map or a career ladder of a program of interest that's very easy for them to understand, that says, we've got a system in place to help you step you through step by step the process, so they are not lost in the maze, so to speak.
Well, that's a good question. Good answer too. We've got several questions. We won't have time to take them all now, but we'll probably reserve a couple of them to the end. But I can't resist bringing this one forward, Hope, and with Bob on the line, I think he might want to chime in too. So here's the question. So obviously, there's a lot of economic challenges for industry today, just from the economic standpoint. Here's the question: are employers continuing to support their employees, their current employees, for their education and training by providing financial assistance? Or do you, Hope, or you, Bob, do you see that on decline, or are companies still able to do that, provide things like tuition assistance? What do you think?
I'm going to let Bob speak to that because I know he's had recent visits with employers about those employee training programs just recently.
Go ahead, Bob.
I would say, number one, most employers that I've met with around the country and over the last 3 to 5 years, and then recently here in Western Massachusetts, they all face the same challenges, which is remaining competitive. And to remain competitive, it's about increasing productivity and increasing success. And those companies who understand that their success, and I will talk a little bit more about this in the presentation, is driven by the quality of their performance for their employees, understand the need to invest in their employees. And
right.
if there is a gap between the willingness to invest, it's in their knowledge of how to identify the impact of the investment. And that's a very important component, is that in the process of defining a pathway and the stages of a pathway to remediate a student, it's the alignment, and then second, it's being able to show the employer the benefits. What are the benefits to you and your bottom line, either by increasing revenue or by reducing costs? And when you can get to that stage, then most employers quickly understand the return on investment and then make the investment in training. The other element, certainly, of tuition reimbursement, I think, over the last few years is an area where some employers cut back because of economic times. So the benefit of tuition reimbursement has been cut, sometimes in favor of more systematic training.
Right.
So it really depends on the company and the region.
So it depends. I guess your answer makes sense. If they can see an ROI, they're going to be more willing to do it, and yet they're facing their own economic constraints as well. So, there's another question, Bob, but I think you're going to actually address it as we go forward into your section, and it talks about how do you make these connections and get buy-in with industry. So why don't we go forward here? I'm going to advance to slide 1, Hope. Are we ready to turn over to Bob now?
Yes.
Okay, Bob, go ahead. It says employer partnerships that work.
So I guess I'll just give the preface to this slide and the part I'm going to cover. The goal here is to have people understand some strategies that you can use to bring your community and your employers to the table. To talk a little bit about some processes that I've collaborated with colleges and communities in individual companies so that you can build a model that you can replicate and a model that your community can adopt as its constant tool. Because one of the things that you're going to find as you build career pathways is the more you can create a systematic approach, the quicker you can replicate from occupation to occupation, from sector to sector, to build vocabulary and terminology to the process so that after you've done 1 or 2 career pathways and engaged the community and the industry sector in the process, when you go to the 3rd or the 4th, it becomes the way your community and that sector do business. And that's really the way you're going to drive systematic change over a period of time. So if we jump to the next visual, we can talk a little bit. Very good. We can talk a little bit about that process. And the first thing to talk about is inventorying where your community is at a particular time. I often find that some communities are at one stage of the process in that they have a general regional workforce plan or a general regional economic development plan, maybe through an economic development council, a changer, or an employment board, a chamber of commerce, who has set in place a regional plan, or through the national movement through the National Governors Association, who are focusing on sector-based strategies. There is an overarching umbrella of some regional goals. Sometimes you'll get to a community, or you'll be in a community where there may be this overarching goal, but it's not well communicated, and nobody has picked up the ball to start that dialogue of what is the current condition of our community and where is it going. And then it often falls to the leadership of some of the local educational institutions, very often in partnership with a group. So in communities that haven't started workforce development planning, the first stage is to inventory what systems and organizations in their region exist and to define as best you can the roles. Because if you don't define the roles, then you can't build systematic solutions. One challenge that people often ask is that, don't you find that there are a lot of overlapping roles or redundant roles? And the answer is absolutely. And that's fine, because sometimes there is a lot of capacity needed to solve a problem. Other times it does identify that there are overlaps that perhaps one organization or the other could expand or contract what it's doing now and reallocate resources to something else that they could do more effectively. Very often I'll find a community college is doing things that another organization in the region may be doing, and the community college is doing them because it didn't reach out to partner with that other organization because it didn't know it was there, or didn't know the staff, or didn't understand. So the first step is really understanding and inventorying what's in the region. The second is really having an understanding of the current structure of your community, the economic structure of your community, what businesses and industries are in your region, what are the unemployment rates, what are the educational attainment rates, what are the demographics currently, what are the future demographics, It is always an eye-opener, I find, in many communities when you get a group of leaders together as a first step and you present them the demographic information for your region and you show visually the challenges that the region faces in their workforce development. Because in pretty much every part of the country I've been in the last 4 years, from the West Coast to the East Coast, there's one certainty that always comes to the top of the dialogue when I ask a very simple question to community leaders and businesses. What are the top 3 challenges you face? Almost across the board among the top 3 is lack of a qualified workforce. And even in communities that have been hit in the last 3 to 5 years with significant reductions in number of companies or layoffs, it's very interesting that when you talk to those businesses that are in the community, they'll often say, there are great people in our community, they're just not qualified to do what we need done. And you have that continued misalignment of your local labor pool to your local industry needs. And that's a real opportunity for career pathways and systematic solutions of how you take people who have one skill set, knowledge base, and improve their ability to accomplish tasks and become productive for new organizations. So it really is first agreeing what is your community, what challenges do you face, and in that process convening those top business leaders and community leaders to confirm that. What are the industry sectors that are most important currently and which are most important to the future? Because this is about making you successful now, but also successful 3, 5, 10 years in your community, because implementation of pathways take a period of time. It's not a light switch you turn off or on. You have to build it systematically over the time. Clearly, when you do this process, different communities like to engage their business leaders differently. I have found in working with different communities that bringing them collectively together in a forum process that is very well organized, that allows people to participate and allows you to document the community's goals and challenges is essential. You have to get it down on paper that based on what these people have provided for input, this is where our community wants to go, because you have to define the problems before you can get to develop solutions. And that very often there hasn't been a formalized documentation of people's perceptions of needs. Once you have those perceptions of needs, then you can move to the stage of picking those sectors that you are going to triage to fix first. So we're going to identify those key occupations for those sectors that are the constraints to the growth and prosperity of those sectors. So if we look at the next visual, I'll give you some examples of that alignment. So I'm going to use the example of healthcare. I'll see if we're using our tools. How many people using their hand raising button? How many people have in their community a challenge or a perceived challenge for the need for healthcare workers to support?
A lot of hands going up there, Bob.
Okay, so I'll use a couple examples of healthcare because I find that, wow, I'm not sure there weren't any hands that didn't go up. Not that many that didn't go up.
Right.
It's on my screen. So I'll use an example of healthcare, but this does translate to other sectors. What I very often find is when we talk with healthcare and you start to hear of shortages in the healthcare region, what you often find is there are constraints in the system. We have healthcare providers who have many different types of workforce needs. We then have in the middle the educational system and the community agencies who want to support the workforce success of the industry. And on the opposite, or the third leg of the stool, we have many students who are interested in being employed in the healthcare. So when you look at it, the model looks like you'd have the three legs to that stool earlier for it to be a very operational and organized system for success. We have the inputs of students, we have the educational providers, and we have jobs. That's always the goal. 3 steps to the process. What we often find is in the middle of the process that our constraints are the size of programs or perceptions of the jobs that are available. So in Massachusetts, for example, in Western Mass, we have shortages in many healthcare occupations, but our waiting list for the program to get into, just as in many communities, is nursing, because that is the occupation that is perceived as having the most needs and the most potential for employment in our region, and having a good livable wage. So the first step in the industry sector approach is getting together the healthcare leaders of the healthcare organization. And it's very important as the leaders because you're after the vision of the region's healthcare needs. And sometimes people will say, well, when you bring industry together, shouldn't you bring together the practitioners? And my answer is yes, but that's in the development and alignment of curriculum. When we talk about development of pathways and alignment of programs to fill quantities of jobs, you want to start with the leaders of the industry, because you're after documenting where the industry is in the future of the industry. You only get that from the most senior executives, whether that's manufacturing or healthcare or IT or energy systems or entertainment systems or hospitality. It's only those senior leaders who have the strategic vision of their organization. So in that alignment process, you're going to ask them some very specific questions about where the industry is going. You're going to ask them what are the challenges of the shortages in occupations. You're going to ask them what are the operational challenges for their organization and industry. You're going to ask them what are some specific technical or entry-level jobs that are shortages. And you're going to get some ideas on the basic level of skill gaps. And then the last thing that you're going to want to do in that forum process, we very often will do this in a 2-hour, an hour and a half to 2-hour process. You're going to ask them the last question that is very important, which is, what are the top 3 things that you feel the college or the educational system should do to drive the industry's success? Because what that will then do is create a list of potential solutions. And in this process, you do want to get a sense on the quantity of people who have that same problem. You're really after that defining of needs from the industry leader's perspective. So again, you'll have defined those occupational labor pool needs, the performance improvement, the industry challenges. And that then gives you the opportunity to start to think about how you're going to build solutions. And I will note from somebody else's question earlier, how do you get employers to the table? The way you get to employers to the table is you say, we want to bring you to the table to listen and learn what challenges you're having. And that's really what that alignment first step process is. You really have to have a listening. For many leaders, they've been to meetings where they've been told what the colleges and the adult basic ed or the technical education is doing, not to really draw out of them what they'd like done. And there's a very big positioning difference. I would also note that you want senior executives to be invited by senior executives. So you want presidents to invite presidents to the table, or most senior leaders in your community to invite other senior leaders. So as we talk about the next slide, I'll talk about what happens out of that process. Out of that process, you do start to get the dialogue about what the industry would like done and why. And so this slide is a very simple visual that represents an outcome from a dialogue with the healthcare group of healthcare providers. And in their session, these are the things that they talked about of purpose, role, and expectations. The key performance indicators that they, as leaders, are tracked on and evaluated on are net profit, revenue, market share, unit output, revenues per employee, return on investment, or free cash flow. This is what, as leaders, they're identifying their goals. Then they'll talk about, for a department within your function, what do you use to measure that department's success? Because that department is comprised of individuals who work in specific occupations, but does that department agree and understand how it's measured for success? So in this case, they're measured by success for a number of units, sales, operating margin, production yield, customer satisfaction, and no error ratio. So this was a manufacturer, very specifically. This is what that department's measures of success are. And you would be very surprised, for both key performance indicators and departments that measure success, how many organizations don't have clarity and alignment in their own teams of that's what we're trying to do. And it's not, if you don't have alignment of what you're trying to accomplish, it's very difficult to get there. It's particularly difficult to get there to tell somebody in their role in an occupation how their efforts align back to impacting the success of the organization. So in the third, in the green box to the far right, you see the example of what are the outputs of a particular occupation, and how do we evaluate the success of our employees. And this was, again, on manufacturing. An interesting dialogue in this case was in this region of the country, in the Northeast region of the country, we have significant shortages in machinists. And for years and years and years, many educational institutions and communities have interpreted that to be a need for CNC machinists. And we've been designing programs to create very sophisticated CNC machinists. And what we found going through this process was that business and industry has really changed its operational models and really needs machine operators, which are very different than full CNC machinists. And in fact, they may need 1 or 2 CNC full machinists, but they may need 10 or 20 operators. And in this particular model, one of the things that was discovered in a college in New York was that we weren't realigning our recruitment and our career pathway strategy to meet the volume of people needed as operators, and we were focusing only on machinists. So part of this process in defining roles and expectations aligns back to solving the problem. You'll see on the next slide how you start to confirm and document. So I tried to provide kind of examples of the kind of questions we would ask in an industry forum that define and let you gather that information. You'll see that we use the term probably, as you're reading down that slide, very often tell us your top 3. And process-wise, if we were doing this with a hospital, for example, we would say, what are the top 3 ways employees drive or impact the department's performance? We might have 5 different people who are giving us their top 3. And it would allow us to say, is there consistency? Is everybody saying the same 3, or did we get a list of 15 different things? So part of the process is getting that frequency of response to see what comes to the top and see if we have alignment as we are documenting the needs. And that's very true for an individual occupation or general questions about the industry. The key again to this is consistency in questioning, because one of the strategies that you want to employ is after you've gotten alignment with the leadership, you now want to have an idea of an example of the same terminology or questioning that you may now move down through the organization to supervisors and employees. And I'm going to give an example as you engage the employers on the next visual. One of the things you're going to start to do is talk about the mastery level. So earlier somebody on the chat mentioned the question of, well, if I have a job and I want to start assessing the community's needs and I want to start then getting alignment of curriculum, how do I bridge that? So I now know from my industry forum that these are the jobs, I know these are the basic skills that employer leadership is telling me, and these are the occupations that they're telling me are their constraints. How do I now determine how we should create our curriculum differently to meet their needs, or how to revise our curriculum, or if it's a new occupation, how do I get them to help me build a curriculum for their adoption? So the first step is to define those tasks that need to be accomplished. So we have to agree on the tasks, the knowledge, and the skill. And the visual that you have in front of you is one that was done for the top tasks defined for an occupation for medical coding. And this was done, and you're going to see what you on the screen, organizational leaders, team leaders, and employees. One is diamond, one is a blue square, and one is a red triangle. And in each case, the person was asked to rate the importance of each of these 10 skill levels, 10 different skills as you see as it goes across the bottom, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest level of importance and 0 being the least level of mastery level importance. And I think this chart gives you an example very quickly of an organization that didn't have alignment of what people were supposed to do. Because what should be happening is, if you look on item 2, which would be across the bottom, and you work your way up, you'll see that every single person rated that one as a 5. And that means that we have alignment, that that's a very important task that certainly would want to be in a curriculum, and would want to be one that we would make sure that our students were very successful at. If you look at some of the ones to the left side and the right side of that, you'll notice that there's a very different levels and different ordering in what would be task number 1 and 3 on the chart. And you see we don't have alignment in our mastery level expected. In fact, our team leader thinks it's less important or essential that they master it than our organizational leader, and our employees kind of in the mid between the two. So very often the question is, where do I start with to get the tasks? I need the tasks before I can rate them, Bob. Well, the place to go to get your task list is to go to ONET. And ONET is a great resource because you can go by industry and occupational code, and you can download into a spreadsheet their versions of tasks, skills, and abilities, and they become the framework to have a dialogue with employers to validate those tasks. So we'll use those as a rating scale to start to get an idea of abilities and knowledges. And on the next slide, you're going to be able to see another example. This is when we talk about alignment of curriculum and to industry. So we've now at the next stage of this process, we did an industry forum, and now we're skill gapping. We're looking at some very specific occupations. This one was medical coders. And for all of us in the country, we may or may not know that medical coding is going through some very significant changes in the next 2 years, where we move essentially from one language to a different language, which means everybody in the healthcare industry is going to have to retrain all their medical coders, but more importantly on that, almost all their employers, because of all their employees because of electronic medical records, are also going to have some level of training. it's a very significant national challenge, and every community faces it. And in our community, we are trying to get out ahead of that by building collaborative solutions. So what we did was we worked with one of the certification organizations, AHIMA, and looked at their competencies, and then had our employers. So you see these numbers on the chart of 1 through 35. There were 35 different competencies, and a number, about 11 employers, large employers in the region, everything from a hospital with 6,000 employees down to one employer with about 100 employees participated in this. And here they rated what are the task mastery levels required for each of those, and then they were sorted so that you have this progression. So we have on our far left the ones that they said are most important, to the far right to the ones that they view as least important. So you can see, just in knowing that, it allows you to think about how you would emphasize your allocation of time or ensuring the excellence of performance of students about those mastery levels. The next chart down starts to give you an idea on the need for incumbent workforce training, somebody else's earlier question. So you see the green line that shows that, in fact, they are all telling us their current employees are performing significantly below the mastery level required to be successful in that job. So quickly you can see that you can point to them and say, well, if your mastery level is the blue line and you're at the green line, what kind of training should we be providing, and what should we emphasize first to enhance your employees' success? Then, in our community, the really bad news is the red line, because the red line at the bottom represents all those people that they've recently hired. In this case, this is the abilities of people they've hired in the last year. And you can see what they're telling us is those people, assuming they can hire the best people in the labor pool, right? So they're doing effective hiring. They are hiring people who are way below the level of mastery level. And what that tells us is that the output of our programs are not aligned even to the current workforce, incumbent workforce skill levels, never mind the desired performance levels. But we have a significant gap. And that means that we have to either look at how our programs are outputting students, we have to look at how they're recruiting students, and it starts to signal the need, when the gaps are that wide, for the ideas of stackable certificates potentially that might allow us to go, in this case, from a medical coder 1 to a medical coder 2, or from a billing clerk to a medical coder to a medical coding 2. It would also suggest that when we hire new employees, that our companies are investing a lot of money through on-the-job training that they may or may not be aware of. So for example, when I shared this with a large hospital and with their employees, and their chart looked like this, they quickly understood that remediating with more sophistication in new employee orientation would get their employees productive much faster. They were basically bringing them on the job, sitting them in chairs, and then doing very loose employee orientation and first 6-month training, and as a result had significant turnover rates. So this just is a very simple way. We would do a skill gap like this in about an hour for a company or for a group of companies to look at a regional workforce need. And then again, that will align back to taking the competencies and building your educational strategy, because now you can align your curriculum and you can align your emphasis of curriculum and your tools for assessment of student performance to industry standards and into industry's emphasis on abilities. And so we would do this with competencies, we'd do this with knowledge, we'd sometimes do this with use of equipment as a strategy, and you can get all of those using ONET. So I think that will give you, some pretty good ideas on a process to engage industry and move them through those elements. And so we'll move to the next slide. And I think that this represents something that Rick Stevens, the Vice President of Boeing, championed so well, is that you have to develop common language in a vocabulary, because if we talk in things like credits versus talking training hours, or we talk about career pathways without our employers understanding what a career pathway is, then it doesn't translate and you get barriers to success. And that's the other thing about bringing people together in an industry sector forum and an industry sector advisory role, is that you start to get clarity in roles and terminology. Second line is organizing, as I said, that you have to keep emphasizing the motivation of the partners. What is the result? The result of new employees for that organization is also the result of you having higher potential success in graduating students or into certificates or degrees, or your ability to recruit more students. So you start to get alignment. What's good for them is very often good for you, and it allows you to make the case to them for continued partnering. I would also note on number 4, it points clear evidence that the proposed program will increase productivity. One element with increased alignment with industry and increased engagement is they can remove constraining factors. In particular with healthcare, it is often expense. And I'll use an example here. We have an employer who really has a shortage of highly qualified nurses and highly qualified surgical processing techs. So as they understood that we could build a more sophisticated employee if we had better equipment to train them on the front end, we were able to work with them to invest in equipment for the college so their employees would be trained when they came in the door. And we're going through that right now actually with the same employer of medical coding, who's talking about building a medical coding simulation lab for us so that our students will become highly prepared employees. And so they will break down constraints if they understand there's a return on investment.
Hey Bob, I'll interrupt for a second, excuse me. That was a good example. Just in the interest of time, watch ourselves going forward to make sure that we get a chance to overview what you're doing. Thanks.
Sure. And again, this is, as you'll see on that slide, you really need to think about this as always about building blocks, and that the building blocks need to be put in place systematically as you move forward. And then I talk about the power of employer advisory committees. The process that I mentioned is to have them engaged, that you want to have a two-way dialogue, you want them to participate. The more they participate and the more they engage, the more they thirst to invest and partner. If it's what I call meet need, which I've seen in many communities, that they'll come, they'll sit, they'll meet, there'll be a little bit of talk about what's happening new, and then they'll leave and you'll talk to them once a year, then you won't get continuous cycles. You want this to be a process, a dialogue, not a rubber stamp of approval. The better the dialogue, the more engagement and partnering will happen. And certainly the more you have them employer-led, as I've mentioned, the more credibility you have, the more successful they have, more validation of content, the more credibility, and the more assistance in adapting skills for local needs. They really become part of your organization. They become part of your relationship. And I should note that convening them with other organizations at the same time can be very successful. And when we will talk about regional workforce needs in healthcare, for example, it's not just my college and the other community college in the region at the table. There are other educational providers, because we are all working simultaneously to solve the problems that we have the tools to solve. Some things I do are different than things that might be done at the local university or other private or proprietary schools. So we're all listening to industry needs to find solutions. And I think this is, again, what we all want when we're done. This is the desired outcomes. We want employers the educators want employers who have their problems solved, and employers want to have faculty and administrators who are engaged in responding and responding timely and understanding that their problems are a community problem, and they want to know how constraints can be broke down and to meet their hiring cycles, for example, or their placement cycles. So we'll move to the next one.
Yeah, and I think, Bob, this is a great video that we'll skip right now in the interest of time, but I'll just point out to our audience something to visit when you receive the slides. It's an example of how the Minnesota community colleges are really engaging employers in a process very similar to what we've been talking about today, and how that's helping them build their career pathways programs.
And ultimately, this all goes about the bottom line, and this is your community's bottom line, is that economic development and workforce development are linked, and that the better the quality of your workforce development, the increase of your economic development, because highly productive employees grow economic success, and highly productive workforce systems attract and retain and accelerate organizations. And the lack of a workforce system is now a community competitive advantage, and it really points to how important it is to be developing strategic career pathway initiatives. And I think we've hit all these, but it is the willingness. How do you start? You work on the language, you work on collaboration, and you have to realize that this is a process that happens over time. And you have to be committed to the process, and you have to be committed for the collaboration. It is a building block process. And again, this is just a summary of outcomes that we certainly have seen because of employer engagement. You know, they will help you accomplish all of these, including the element of marketing, advocacy, recruitment, and mentoring and placing, because they see strong benefits to it. An example of that is we are working very diligently here recently to get alignment in the placement process. It's something as the two community colleges in our region we've done, but not as well as possible of making it more seamless. And so when we've been talking with employers, they have definitely come to the table and said, hey, we want to hire your graduates. As a matter of fact, we want to hire everyone we can. One of our challenges is we don't think we know how to recruit effectively. And so we're looking at how we develop strategies. And I've certainly mentioned their commitment of resources.
I'm going to point out this next resource, and this is the last slide in this section of our presentation. This is something that offers a snapshot of 17 programs across the country. Some of the examples that they're using in areas like prioritizing program development, recruitment, and business engagement. It's a publication that CORD's National Career Pathways Network developed a couple of years ago in partnership with the U.S. Chambers Institute for a Competitive Workforce. It's available on the NCPN website for free and has a great front matter section that's really a conversation starter. And it was designed to be an outreach in your community to start the conversation with business partners, really explain career pathways in terms that they can understand, and then show them a whole array of industry sectors in which career pathways programs are being successful. And Mike, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. You know, we've, Bob, there was some fascinating discussion there about from a perspective of how to deal with industry, and we just have time for one question I'd like to forward to you at this point. You mentioned start at the top, and that certainly seems like a good suggestion, because you're getting that visionary emphasis that you mentioned. And then what struck me is you want to have people within your own organization at an equivalent level making the ask, so to speak. You know, you want your president asking the president sort of deal. But many of us on the line wonder, how do you start this? How do you get this going? How do you get your president to call the president of another company? Or is it that simple? Just give us a brief, maybe takeaway that we could use there.
Getting presidents to call other presidents that they know is relatively simple. Particularly if you use healthcare, for example, you can identify the list of the organizations that you'd like to attend. One, a formal letter from president to president makes a huge difference. In directing that letter that you, Bob LePage, first the president, will be following up for attendance makes a huge difference. Also, advocacy, like anything, picking a date by finding the first 3 or 4 that you know can attend makes it much easier.
Yeah,
because you call, just like having a party at your house, you call and get your friends involved first, and then you call others and they say who's coming, and then you list your friends, and then they go, well, I don't want to miss that party.
Yeah, right.
Because if John's coming, then wow, you must be talking about something important. So
I've used that approach before for parties, but anyhow, so I get the idea. It's a good idea. All right.
That's definitely a strategy.
Good. Thanks, Bob. Hope, let's go ahead and go into the next section about teaching in context.
Alrighty, we'll do that, and we'll jump right into our first slide. I'm sure none of you have ever heard this question from a student in any of your classes ever.
It's funny.
This is point of our conversation about learning, about teaching in context, and the importance of it to a successful series of courses in a Career Pathways program. Obviously, certainly with returning adults, the sooner we can turn on that light bulb, the better. So a couple of definitions for our conversation here around contextual teaching and learning. The term contextualized instruction and the term integrated education and training, certainly in the adult education space, are 2 terms that are used often, bantered around a lot. To some people they mean the same thing, to others they mean something very different. These are the definitions that we use today, and typically in our conversation, certainly with states, the contextualized instruction approach, integrating basic reading, math, and language content with industry and occupation knowledge, using industry and occupation as the context for teaching that particular content, and an integrated education and training model, often referred to as the IBES model from Washington State. It truly integrates by combining, usually with two instructors side by side, combining the occupational skills training with adult education services simultaneously or in a supportive role to deliver that content. So just some definitions as we move forward. But what do we really mean by a contextual approach? Well, here at CORD, we've spent many decades helping teachers make those connections to academic concepts and workplace experiences for students so they really can have that aha moment as quickly as possible and be motivated to pursue. But a contextual approach really refers to years of intelligence and learning theory research by individuals such as Gardner and Kolb, Kane and Kane, and that really leads us, we can distill that down, I don't want to oversimplify it, but really distill it down to just 4 basic premises of contextual teaching and learning, and that is that we know that learning is enhanced when new information is presented in a familiar context, something we already know about. People learn better when they learn experientially, when they communicate with one another through an interpersonal, a sharing type of activity, collaborative learning, and that we know that knowledge is transferred from one situation to another, but that it doesn't just happen overnight. It's a skill that has to be taught and learned. At CORD, we have a little mnemonic device called the REACT strategies that we use to help teachers understand the process by which contextual teaching will take place over time and evolve. Relating, experiencing, applying, cooperating, and transferring is really kind of a process that we use and a template that we offer to faculty to help them step through taking a look at a lesson and starting at the relating process by merely learning in the context of one's life experiences or knowledge that they bring to the table, then experience it through some hands-on activities, learning by doing, through exploring, discovery learning, then applying it, doing an activity that really puts those new skills to use, cooperating with others then, shared responsibility, working in teams, critical thinking, skills applied to the situation, really interacting and each team member playing a specific role toward a desired outcome. And then obviously where the rubber meets the road is the ability to use that knowledge in a new context or a novel situation. So the REACT strategy is just our way of reminding ourselves of that process. When we think about adult learners and the importance of contextual strategies to them, we're reminded by the fact that adult learners, especially those who are returning to education after a lengthy hiatus, They've got to see that connection between the course that they're being required to take and their desired careers. Many of them will not have experienced success with at least one or more gatekeeper subjects, and math is often that subject. And so helping them make that connection so that they're motivated to learn and see the relationship of an academic concept to the workplace experience, but also that they can make those connections and that they can succeed. Engaging them with the content and making those connections to the context really helps them do that. So how do we do that? Well, by teaming together, whether it's a basic skills instructor with a CTE instructor, with a best developmental ed instructor, with a technical skills instructor, it's that combining academic and technical content, because adult learners will often need some extra support in math and reading, for example, in a workforce course. So if you're partnering together, you can help that happen much more quickly. Obviously, adult ed faculty, they want to make connections to the workplace to engage these learners. They don't want to just be thinking about GED prep. There's life beyond that. There's post-secondary credential attainment. And how are we going to get there? By making those connections and turning that bulb on more quickly. And how can this partnership take place, and how can we really align these concepts? When you really take a close look at the academic and the workforce courses and the concepts that are taught, we oftentimes find a lot of commonalities, but we may not be using the same vocabulary terms to really mean the same thing. So partnering can really enable an aha moment on the part of faculty too, and that teaming can oftentimes then lead to a real win-win situation for both faculty and instructors. But when you look at those course comparisons, you're going to be looking for embedded concepts, and that may occur in one of at least three ways, where an academic concept, for example, is addressed in the CTE course the same way that would be addressed in a math or another academic subject area. So it's a matter of using the same terminology so a student can understand the fact when they're covering that same concept in a math class and an automotive class that they're learning and applying the same thing. There's also a concept that may not be explicitly addressed in the CTE course, but it serves as a foundation for that technical field, or there's an opportunity to teach within the context of a real-world scenario from a technical field to teach that academic concept. There are a variety of planning and delivery models that teams of faculty can employ. This is just a starting point, but when you think about teaming, there are lots of different ways to do it and varying degrees at which you can do that. The IBEST model that I mentioned earlier is a fabulous model with some great evidence and proven success behind it. Some states will look at it and say, oh, there's no way we can afford 2 faculty, so we can't do that model. So there's lots of different ways to get at that, and there's lots of different strategies to teach contextually by pairing and linking courses, doing some team planning, some team teaching, but not all the time. IBEST, as I mentioned, where often it's a 50-50 relationship between the ABE and the technical faculty, but also IBEST-like and the Accelerating Opportunity Project that a number of states are engaged in right now. There's a little bit of give and take there, and so it may not be 50%, it may be more like 35%, but certainly a very deliberate partnering of those two groups of faculty. And then obviously in bridge programs, there's a lot of partnering that has to go on, but maybe at different times and at different levels. There's a great example of contextual teaching that's taking place in a bridge program, actually in an NSF ATE project-connected program called Bridge to Biotech in the San Francisco Bay Area. And if you're not familiar with that, I encourage you to spend time learning about it. They have some wonderful resources on their website. And it's really a great example of a partnership by employers, by educational institutions, and by working adults who were looking for new opportunities. And the biotech field, obviously one of great growth, continues to be in the Bay Area. And this program offers a 2-semester lab assistant certificate program that combines academic skills with internships. All of the courses are credit-bearing. Students are being taught lab techniques while strengthening their math and their language skills, and there's really the significant industry involvement along the way. There's a great video, which unfortunately we don't have the time to show you, but when you visit the Bridge to Biotech site, you'll see a link there, and you'll also see it in the slides. And what it really brings to life is how teaching those technical concepts alongside those academic concepts and using the workplace context as our scenario really truly makes all the difference. And for adult learners, they immediately see that relevance and they're motivated to be engaged. There's a number of states who are doing some very interesting work in this area. The Minnesota Fast Track Adult Career Pathways Project is just one of them. And there's some links that we'll send you so that you can explore this further if you're not familiar with it. But it shows here again a progression like we've talked about today in Career Pathways programs, all the way from a bridge prep program through post-secondary credential attainment. But there's some wonderful engagement of contextual teaching strategies along the way and some sharing of curriculum amongst the faculty teams that are participating in program development in each of these gears, if you will, or steps of their programs. And so that's a great resource to take a look at in the models that they're using to build their programs. I mentioned earlier too, when you're looking at marketing and certainly when you're targeting specific populations, Instituto del Progreso Latino is a community-based organization in Chicago that's done some fabulous work around using contextualized instruction. They've built a number of programs in partnership with the City Colleges of Chicago, several of their campuses. And you see here a great example from one of their publications on how they're using career maps to demonstrate to students exactly the progression of the content of the courses that they will take. And one of the things that the folks at Instituto talk about is using degrees of contextualization and being mindful as you're stepping a learner through a career pathways program. You see on this slide a pre-CNA bridge program. They also, and their programs go all the way through LPN and on to RN, but there's certain stages along the way. And so you're using the workplace context at an appropriate time and an appropriate level when the students are also then mastering that basic skills content and then moving on up in the series of succession of educational stages. And when they've mastered higher levels of academic content, then a greater degree of workplace context can then be applied successfully. So here again, another way of looking at contextualized instruction, but certainly one that I encourage you to take a look at. And here's one last example. This is from New York, from one of the CUNY colleges. Kingsborough Community College has been doing some great work, and I point this out as a program example because it's in an industry sector that we don't see quite as often, and it's a really great way. It's a 14-week program that culminates in an industry credential. It's called No Limits, and it's a food management vocational ESL curricula that was developed by the college in partnership with Coney Island Hospital. And they've done a great job of developing contextualized curriculum and then sharing it out through faculty who want to take advantage of those. There's a specific set of tools that they have available to prepare students to sit for I think it's a ServSafe food handling certificate, and then connecting them onto the additional programs at the college in hospitality and food management so that they can continue on those ladders and on those pathways. Here are some resources related to the IBEST and the Integrated Education and Training model that we talked about that you may want to take a look at for further study. I mentioned the Accelerating Opportunity Project. Here's a link to that. STEM Transitions is a project that our team at CORD did in partnership with the U.S. Department of Education a couple of years ago. It's a free website with lots of free contextualized projects that you can use that start with an industry scenario and then bring in all kinds of strategies for teaching academic content contextually in the math and science area and connecting it to the 6 different STEM-related career clusters. So that's a resource for you. And then also another activity that we're involved in is a federal investment called Designing Instruction for Career Pathways. And if you're not familiar with this project, I encourage you to visit the acpsc.org website. There's some great contextual teaching resources found in this big red button right here in the middle. When you visit the homepage, has some great instructional resources that have been contributed from states and programs across the country that demonstrate that convergence of teaching adult education basic skills content within the context of career pathways. So hopefully today we've given you a glimpse at a lot of strategies and a host of resources that can help you, that you can take advantage of, that you can adapt for use in your career pathways programs that will just help get you further down the road. I'll turn it back to you, Mike.
Thanks. Perfect. And perfect timing, Hope and Bob. We're just a few minutes away to handle our final things from the close of our webinar, to handle our final questions. So participants, please note them. And as we're considering our final questions, I'm going to put up a survey question here, and it'll just take just a moment to launch this. And we'd certainly appreciate your feedback on the event today. There's a few questions on this survey, and it just takes just a moment for you to reply to them. So let's wait a second for this to come up. There it is. So please go ahead. Some of you, the load time is a little bit different on each of these surveys, so some of you may see them. Go ahead and click on the questions and submit them. Now, while they're doing that, Hope and Bob, let me ask you one question that's come up over and over again. As you're creating these programs at your colleges, obviously it takes some money. If you're doing one of these IBEST things, you're using team teachers, and now you have 2 teachers instead of 1. How do you fund these sort of things? Bob, what's your experience? Briefly, is there a golden goose? Is there a golden something out there that you can go for funds to do this sort of thing? Do you have any ideas on that?
Yeah, I've found that the golden goose is industry itself. If industry understands the value of the workers, and they understand and have the need for qualified workers, and they understand that you're going to be saving them money by preparing better workers, then they will often invest in the gap, particularly if there are multiple employers in a region and they all understand what very often seems like large sums of money to us really aren't when you split it between 10 people. If it's going to cost you $50,000 and you ask those 10 employers each to provide $5,000, it really, you find that it's not a hard sell. And many times I find that if you position it right, they volunteer to remove constraints before you even ask them.
That's good thinking. So in other words, you make the ask. What have you got to think? What have you got to say about that, Hope?
I'm going to say the other thing I would suggest is when people are looking at grants for career pathway systems or programs, to not say, well, I don't know if we can be competitive for that $12 million grant. Well, that's okay. You don't have to, Rome wasn't built in a day. If you can start small and you have a workforce development grant from your state or from your region, and you do a small pilot to demonstrate that your idea is going to work and truly will be responsive to the needs of maybe just even one company. Start small with a single partnership, demonstrate that your idea is going to work and make an impact, and then say, let's use this data to then incrementally then apply for a larger opportunity in partnership with other institutions, and then you're going to certainly, I would think, increase your chances of success.
Excellent, excellent response. It's something that we struggle with here at our own college system, and inevitably, how do you fund these initiatives? I like your answer, Bob, about thinking about industry. Participants, for those of you online, I'm just going to leave the survey up for another 15 seconds or so. One of the questions that came up as we're wrapping up here today is, there's a lot of links. Hope you provided a lot of interesting resources here. I just want to point out to participants, they will be getting the complete slides from today as well as the recording itself, and typically we do that in 2 business days. So you'll have all of those links which you can follow on. And there was a resource document, a 2-pager that had all of these links plus more on them. So we're providing lots of distinct information. My final question, and let me just close out here and then we'll end. So I'm closing the survey now, folks. I'm going to count down from 5. Please hit submit if you haven't had a chance. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There we go. Now, last things for today. Again, as I mentioned, you'll get this information, and you can access not only this webinar, but others, by going to our website, maytechnetworks.org, and then searching. Like today, you could use the term webinar career pathways, or just put in webinars to see all of our other ones. We have some upcoming webinars. This is an exciting one on February 8th. How does one review technology programs? How do you know when to continue them, when you should sunset them? There's some tough decisions to be made. So there's a 2-program series, how do you evaluate programs, and then surviving program review for those of you who might be involved in it. On March 8th, we switch over to the technology side of our webinar series and talk about renewable energies. So please either respond to our emails, our persistent emails about registering for those things. If you'd like a certificate that says you took part today, send Shannon an email, and you can see her email address there, shannon.payne@domail, that's district mail, maricopa.edu. If you have ability to go to one conference this summer that's involved with workforce and technology education, it should be HITECH in Austin, Texas this year, July 21 through 24. There's going to be about 600 people talking about the things that we've talked about today and a whole variety of other topics. So you can see all the details coming up. Registration will probably open about February 1st, highimpacttech.org. So I'd like to thank you all again, and personally to Bob for making time in your schedule, for Hope for putting together the great presentation and working as we prepared for this. It was just great being part of it. Hope you have any comments that you'd like to throw out there, something you might have seen in the question box today, or any concluding comments you'd like to make.
No, I just would like to thank everyone for engaging in participation today, and invite you to really follow along those resources that we shared, and wish you the best of luck as you develop your own programs.
Very good. You can see several people are using their emoticon buttons to give a little bit of applause there. That's good. Bob, thank you again for joining us, taking you away from the world of workforce and gaming out there in Massachusetts. Any concluding comments from you?
Just like high school, she said, Hope said
what
exactly
she said.
what I was going to say.
What
Thanks
she
for
said.
your time today, and the opportunity to learn from others is always something we'd like to take advantage of.
Correct.
So I think it's a great project that you have.
Thank you again. I invite you both to stand the line for a moment as I conclude. Participants, this officially concludes our webinar. Thank you for joining. That ends the recording.